Richard had everything money could buy. 3 houses, 5 cars, millions in the bank. He felt like a king walking down the busy street. Then a small voice stopped him cold. "I just want milk." 4 simple words from a hungry little girl that would change his life forever. Before watching full story, comment below from where are you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. Richard sat in his big leather chair looking out at the city below. From the 30th floor of his office building, everything looked small. Cars moved like ants on the streets. People walked around like tiny dots. He smiled and took a sip of his expensive coffee. "Sir, your meeting is in 10 minutes, his secretary said from the doorway. "Good," Richard replied. He was about to make another $1 million deal. Life was perfect. He had 3 houses, 5 cars, and more money than he could count. At 45, he had everything he had ever wanted. But today would be different. Today would change everything. After his meeting, Richard walked to his favorite restaurant. He always ate lunch there on Fridays. The food was expensive, and that made him feel important. As he walked down the busy street, people moved out of his way. His suit was worth more than most people made in a month. Near the restaurant, he saw something that made him stop. A little girl was sitting on the sidewalk. She was very thin and wore old, dirty clothes. Her hair was messy and her shoes had holes in them. She looked about 7 years old. Richard had seen homeless people before. He usually walked past them quickly. But something about this little girl made him pause. Maybe it was how quietly she sat. She wasn't asking for money like others did. She just sat there holding a small empty cup. Their eyes met for a moment. Her eyes were big and brown, filled with a sadness that seemed too heavy for such a small person. Richard felt uncomfortable. He started to walk away, but then he heard her voice. "Excuse me, sir," she whispered so softly he almost didn't hear her. Richard turned around. The little girl was looking up at him with hope in her tired eyes. "I just want milk," she said quietly. Those 4 simple words hit Richard like a punch to the chest. He stood there frozen. "I just want milk. Not money, not food, not toys. Just milk." Something so basic, so simple that Richard never even thought about it. His refrigerator at home had 3 different types of milk, and he never worried about running out. "What did you say?" Richard asked, though he had heard her clearly. "I just want milk," she repeated, her voice barely louder than a whisper. "I haven't had milk in a long time." Richard looked around. People walked past them, busy with their own lives. No one else seemed to notice the little girl. How long had she been sitting there? How long had she been asking for something so simple? "Where are your parents?" Richard asked, kneeling down to her level. "My mama is sick," the girl said. "She can't work anymore. We don't have money for food or milk." Her voice cracked a little when she said the word milk. Richard felt something strange in his chest. It was a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. Was it sadness? Guilt? He couldn't name it, but it made him uncomfortable. "What's your name?" he asked. "Emma," she replied. "Emma, I'm Richard." He looked at her small face, marked by hunger and worry. "Where do you live?" Emma pointed down the street. "In the old building. The one with broken windows. Mama and I have a small room there." Richard knew that building. He had bought it 5 years ago. It was supposed to be torn down to build a new shopping center. But the plans had been delayed, so poor families had moved into the empty building. Richard had never cared about them before. They were just people living in his property without paying rent. Now, looking at Emma, he realized one of those families was hers. "Take me there," Richard said suddenly. Emma looked surprised. "Really?" "Yes. I want to meet your mother." Emma stood up slowly. She was even thinner than Richard had first thought. Her legs looked like they might break if she walked too fast. She led him down the street, her small hand occasionally reaching out to touch walls for support. The building was worse than Richard remembered. The windows were broken and the walls were covered in dirt and marks. There was no electricity, and the stairs creaked loudly as they climbed to the 3rd floor. "This is where we live," Emma said, opening a door that barely hung on its hinges. The room was tiny and dark. In one corner, a woman lay on a thin mattress on the floor. She looked very sick and thin, just like Emma but older. When she saw Richard in his expensive suit, she tried to sit up. "Emma, who is this man?" her mother asked weakly. "He's Richard, Mama. He's going to help us get milk." Richard looked around the room. There was nothing there. No furniture, no food, no hope. Just a sick mother and her daughter, trying to survive in his building. "Ma'am," Richard said softly. I own this building." Emma's mother looked scared. "Please don't make us leave. I know we should pay rent, but I lost my job when I got sick." Emma and I have nowhere else to go. Richard felt that strange feeling in his chest again, but stronger now. Here was a woman, sick and desperate, worried about being thrown out onto the street. And here was little Emma who just wanted milk. "How long have you been sick?" Richard asked Emma's mother. 3 months, she replied. "I used to work at the factory, but when I got sick they fired me. We used up all our savings for medicine, but it didn't help much. Now we have nothing left." "And Emma? Does she go to school?" Emma's mother looked ashamed. "She used to. But we couldn't afford the supplies and she was always hungry at school. The other children made fun of her for being thin. So I told her to stay home." Richard looked at Emma, who was listening quietly in the corner. A 7-year-old girl who should be playing and learning was instead sitting in a dark room, asking strangers for milk. "Wait here," Richard said. "I'll be back." He left the building and walked quickly to the nearest grocery store. His mind was racing. How had he never thought about the people living in his building? How had he been so blind to the suffering happening right under his nose? In the store, Richard filled 2 shopping carts with food. Milk, bread, fruit, vegetables, meat, and everything else he could think of. The cashier looked at him strangely when he paid for so much food, but Richard didn't care. He also stopped at a pharmacy and bought medicine, vitamins, and anything else that might help a sick woman get better. When he returned to the building, Emma and her mother were waiting exactly where he had left them. Emma's eyes grew wide when she saw all the bags Richard was carrying. "I brought milk," Richard said, pulling out a large container. "And some other things too." Emma's mother started to cry. "Sir, we can't pay you for all this." "You don't need to pay me," Richard said. He opened the milk and poured some into a clean cup he had brought. "Here, Emma." Emma took the cup with both hands as if it was made of gold. She drank slowly, savoring every drop. When she finished, she looked up at Richard with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. Richard felt his own eyes getting wet. When was the last time someone had thanked him with such genuine happiness? When was the last time he had made someone truly happy? As he watched Emma drink her milk and her mother eat some bread, Richard thought about his own life. That morning he had eaten breakfast worth more than this family had seen in weeks. He had complained because his coffee wasn't hot enough. He had been annoyed because his car had a small scratch on it. How had he become so disconnected from real problems? How had he forgotten what really mattered? "Emma," Richard said, "do you like books?" Emma nodded eagerly. "I love books, but we don't have any." "Would you like to go to school again?" "More than anything," Emma said. "I want to learn to read big books and maybe become a teacher someday." Richard smiled. It was the first real smile he had felt in years. "What if I told you that you could go to the best school in the city? And your mother could see the best doctors?" Emma's mother shook her head. "Sir, you're very kind, but we could never afford such things." "What if I said you didn't need to afford them? What if I said I wanted to help you because Emma taught me something important today?" "What did she teach you?" Emma's mother asked. Richard looked at Emma, who was finishing her second cup of milk. "She taught me that the most important things in life are often the simplest ones. Like milk. Like kindness. Like caring about other people." Over the next few weeks, Richard's life changed completely. He moved Emma and her mother to a clean, comfortable apartment. He paid for Emma's mother to see the best doctors in the city, and slowly she began to get better. He enrolled Emma in a good school and watched her learn to read with joy and excitement. But the biggest change was in Richard himself. He started visiting other families in his old building. He learned their stories, their struggles, their dreams. He used his money to help them find jobs, get medical care, and send their children to school. Richard still worked hard and made money, but now he had a different purpose. Instead of just making himself richer, he focused on making other people's lives better. He started a foundation to help poor families, and he made sure Emma and her mother were always part of his life. 1 year later, Richard sat in his office again looking out at the city. But everything looked different now. The cars below weren't just ants, they were people going to work, trying to provide for their families. The walking dots weren't just strangers, they were individuals with dreams, fears, and needs. Emma, now healthy and happy, visited his office every Friday after school. She would tell him about what she had learned and show him her homework. She was an excellent student and still dreamed of becoming a teacher. "Mr. Richard," Emma said one Friday afternoon, "do you remember the first thing I ever said to you?" "Of course," Richard replied. "You said, 'I just want milk.'" Emma smiled. "Those words changed both of our lives, didn't they?" Richard nodded. "Yes, they did. They taught me that sometimes the smallest requests come from the biggest needs, and that helping others is the only way to truly help ourselves." I'm glad I met you that day, Emma said. I'm glad too, Richard replied. You saved my life, Emma. I just didn't know it needed saving. As Emma left his office that day, Richard thought about how much his life had changed. He was still wealthy, but now he was also rich in ways that money couldn't buy. He had purpose, he had friends, and most importantly, he had learned how to see the world through the eyes of others. The little girl who had asked for milk had given him something much more valuable than anything he had ever owned. She had given him his humanity back. And every morning when Richard poured milk into his coffee, he remembered Emma's whispered words and smiled, knowing that the simplest things in life are often the most precious ones of all.